The string quartet played softly in the background as I adjusted the simple navy dress I'd chosen for my cousin Emma's wedding. Nothing too flashy, nothing that would draw attention away from the bride. That had always been my approach: blend into the background, let others shine, keep my head down and work. My father, Robert Hartley, stood near the champagne fountain in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, holding court with his usual audience of business associates. At 58, he commanded respect in every room he entered. Senior Vice President of Operations at Meridian Industries, the city's largest manufacturing conglomerate. He'd built his reputation on decisive leadership and an unwavering belief in traditional success metrics. I watched from across the reception hall as he gestured animatedly, probably telling the story about last quarter's record profits for the 100th time this month. My mother, Patricia, stood beside him in her designer gown, nodding at appropriate intervals while scanning the room for more important people to network with. My brother Marcus approached me, champagne flute in hand, his wife Christina clinging to his arm like an expensive accessory. At 35, Marcus was everything our parents had hoped for in a son. Harvard MBA, vice president at Goldman Sachs, penthouse apartment on Fifth Avenue, and a wife whose family owned half of Martha's Vineyard. "Alex," he said using the nickname he knew I hated. "Surprised you showed up. Thought you'd be too busy with your little computer project." I took a sip of my wine, letting the comment slide off me like water off glass. "Wouldn't miss Emma's big day." Christina laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a hurricane. "Marcus told me you're doing something with technology? How? Interesting. Is it profitable?" Before I could answer, my sister Victoria joined our circle. At 32, she was the family's other golden child. Successful real estate attorney, married to a surgeon, 2 perfect children who attended the most prestigious private schools in the city. "Are we talking about Alex's hobby?" Victoria asked, her voice carrying that familiar note of condescension. "Mom mentioned you're still living in that tiny apartment downtown. When are you going to settle down and find a real career?" I'd heard variations of this conversation for the past 8 years. Ever since I'd turned down the prestigious consulting position at McKinsey that Dad had secured for me through his connections. Since I'd chosen to pursue my doctorate in quantum computing instead of following the predetermined path they'd laid out. What they didn't know was that my little computer project had revolutionized quantum error correction, leading to breakthrough advances in processing power that could change the world. What they didn't know was that 3 months ago, I'd been featured on the cover of Forbes as one of the 30 under 30 visionaries reshaping technology. What they didn't know was that my startup Quantum Dynamics had just received a $2.8 billion acquisition offer from Microsoft. But I'd learned long ago that showing my cards too early only led to more questions, more attempts to control my decisions, more pressure to conform to their vision of success. "I'm doing well," I said simply. Marcus scoffed. "Living paycheck to paycheck in a studio apartment isn't what most people would call doing well, Alex." "It's Alexandra," I corrected, though I knew he'd ignore it as always. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of Dad's booming voice from across the room. He was approaching with a distinguished older man I recognized from Business Magazine's Jonathan Pemberton, CEO of Meridian Industries. Dad's ultimate boss, the man who controlled his career trajectory. "Jonathan," Dad said, placing a hand on my shoulder with false warmth, "I'd like you to meet my youngest daughter, Alexandra." He paused, and I could feel the familiar weight of his disappointment. "This is my disappointing daughter. Works in some tech thing." The words hit like they always did, a small stab of pain masked by years of practice. I maintained my smile, extending my hand to Mr. Pemberton. "Pleasure to meet you, sir." Jonathan Pemberton shook my hand, studying my face with the intensity of someone trying to place a memory. His eyes narrowed slightly, then widened. He pulled out his phone, scrolling quickly through what appeared to be a magazine app. "Wait," he said, his voice growing excited. "Aren't you? Isn't this the quantum computing genius from this month's Forbes?" The color drained from Dad's face as Jonathan held up his phone, displaying the Forbes cover. There I was, professional headshot against a backdrop of quantum equations, with the headline "Alexandra Hartley, the 28-year-old who solved quantum computing's biggest problem." The silence that followed was absolute. Marcus's champagne flute froze halfway to his lips. Victoria's mouth fell open slightly. Christina's grip on Marcus's arm tightened as if she needed support. Dad stared at the phone screen, then at me, then back at the screen. That's impossible. Dr. Alexandra Hartley, Jonathan continued, reading from the article. CEO and founder of Quantum Dynamics, the company that developed the breakthrough quantum error correction algorithm that's being called the most significant advancement in computing since the microprocessor. He looked up at me with genuine excitement. You're the one who solved the coherence problem. I nodded slowly. Among other things. My God. Jonathan turned to Dad, who looked like he'd been struck by lightning. Robert, do you have any idea what your daughter has accomplished? Her work is going to revolutionize everything from drug discovery to financial modeling to artificial intelligence. Every major tech company in the world is trying to license her technology. Marcus found his voice first. Alexandra, you never said anything about being successful? I interrupted gently. You never asked. You just assumed. Victoria stepped forward, her lawyer instincts kicking in. The Forbes article. When was this published? 3 weeks ago, Jonathan answered when I remained silent. The same week Microsoft announced they were acquiring Quantum Dynamics for. He scrolled through the article. Here it is. $2.8 billion. Christina made a small choking sound. Dad's face had gone from white to gray. But you live in that small apartment, Mom said, appearing suddenly at Dad's elbow. She must have heard the commotion. You drive that old Honda. I live modestly by choice, I replied. The apartment is actually a penthouse, but I prefer simplicity. And the Honda is reliable. I don't need to prove my worth through material possessions. Jonathan was still scrolling through his phone. Listen to this, he said, beginning to read. Dr. Hartley's groundbreaking work was conducted in near total secrecy, as she preferred to let her research speak for itself rather than seeking publicity. Despite receiving numerous offers from major corporations, she chose to build her own company, maintaining full control over her innovations and their applications. He looked up at Dad with something approaching amazement. Robert, your daughter is one of the most important scientists of our generation. The technology she's developed could solve climate change, revolutionize medicine, transform global communications. He paused. And you introduced her as your disappointing daughter? The question hung in the air like smoke. Around us, other wedding guests had begun to notice the commotion. I could see Emma, radiant in her wedding dress, watching from across the room with curiosity. Dad opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. We didn't know. Because you never asked, I said quietly. You decided 8 years ago that because I didn't follow your predetermined path, I was a failure. You never considered that I might be building something bigger than what you could imagine. Marcus set down his champagne glass with trembling hands. The consulting job at McKinsey, you turned it down to work on this? I turned it down because I had bigger plans. Plans that required freedom to think, to experiment, to fail and try again without corporate oversight or family pressure. Victoria was calculating something behind her eyes. The acquisition, $2.8 billion. What's your percentage of the company? I smiled slightly. I retained 73% ownership when I brought in investors 2 years ago. The acquisition values my stake at approximately $2.04 billion. The number hit them like a physical blow. Christina actually swayed on her feet. Marcus grabbed the nearest chair for support. $2 billion, Dad whispered. You're worth $2 billion? On paper, yes. The wealth was never the goal. The goal was to solve problems that matter, to push the boundaries of human knowledge, to build technology that could help people. Jonathan Pemberton was looking at Dad with an expression I couldn't quite read. Robert, I have to ask, how does it feel to know that your disappointing daughter has just become one of the youngest billionaires in the country? The question was pointed, deliberate. I could see Dad processing not just the shock of my success, but the professional implications. Jonathan Pemberton was his boss, and he'd just witnessed Dad publicly dismiss and belittle someone who was now arguably more successful than anyone in the room. I'm proud, Dad managed, though the words sounded hollow. Are you? I asked quietly. Because 3 hours ago, you were telling Aunt Margaret that you wished I'd at least found a husband by now, since I was clearly incapable of supporting myself financially. Dad flinched. Victoria looked mortified. Marcus was still staring at me like I'd grown a second head. Alexandra, Mom intervened, her voice taking on the smooth, diplomatic tone she used for difficult social situations. We've always been proud of you. We just didn't understand. You didn't understand because you didn't try to understand, I interrupted. Every time I tried to explain my work, you changed the subject or suggested I was wasting my time. Every family gathering became an intervention about my life choices. Jonathan was watching this exchange with fascination. Dr. Hartley, if I may ask, what's next for you? The Forbes article mentioned that the Microsoft acquisition includes a provision for you to continue your research. I nodded. I'll be heading Microsoft's new quantum research division. We're working on applications that could revolutionize everything from cybersecurity to medical diagnostics. Plus, I'm establishing a foundation to provide research grants for underrepresented scientists. Extraordinary, Jonathan murmured. He turned back to Dad. Robert, I hope you realize what an incredible daughter you have. Her work is going to change the world. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of the wedding coordinator calling everyone to attention for the cake cutting. As the crowd began to move toward the main reception area, Jonathan lingered. Dr. Hartley, he said, I'd love to discuss potential collaborations between quantum dynamics and Meridian Industries. We're always looking for ways to incorporate cutting-edge technology into our manufacturing processes. I'd be happy to explore that, I replied. Though you'll want to coordinate with Microsoft's partnership team after the acquisition closes. Of course. Here's my card. He handed me his business card, then glanced at Dad. Robert, I'll expect a full briefing on this conversation at our next board meeting. I want to understand how we can position Meridian to benefit from these quantum computing advances. As Jonathan walked away, my family stood in stunned silence. The reception continued around us, but our little corner had become a bubble of shocked processing. Finally, Marcus spoke. Alexandra, why didn't you tell us? Would you have believed me? I asked. Or would you have assumed I was exaggerating, like when I tried to explain quantum entanglement at Christmas dinner and Dad told me to stop showing off? Victoria, ever the lawyer, was already thinking strategically. The tax implications of this acquisition. Do you have proper legal representation? I almost laughed. I have a team of attorneys from 3 different firms handling various aspects of the deal. Patent law, corporate structure, international licensing. It's all covered. But family should help family, Mom said weakly. Family should support family, I corrected. There's a difference between help and support. You wanted to help me by fixing what you saw as my failures. I needed support to pursue what I knew was possible. Dad had been silent throughout this exchange, but now he stepped forward. Alexandra, we made mistakes. I made mistakes. Can we start over? I studied his face, seeing genuine remorse for the first time in years. Dad, I never wanted to shut you out. I wanted you to trust that I knew what I was doing, even when it didn't look like conventional success. The apartment, the car. You let us think you were struggling financially. I let you reveal your true feelings about my choices. If you'd only been proud of me after discovering I was wealthy, what would that say about your values? The truth of that statement hung between us. Mom looked stricken. Marcus was still processing the magnitude of my success. So what happens now? Victoria asked. Now, I said, we go watch Emma cut her cake and we celebrate her happiness. Tomorrow, I have a board meeting with Microsoft to finalize the acquisition timeline. Next week, I'm giving a keynote at MIT about quantum error correction. And next month, I'm testifying before Congress about the national security implications of quantum computing. I paused, looking at each of them. You're welcome to be part of that life, but only if you can accept that my definition of success might be different from yours. Jonathan Pemberton's voice carried across the reception hall as he spoke to another group of business leaders. I caught fragments of his conversation. Revolutionary technology, brilliant young scientist, proud father must be. Dad heard it too. His shoulders straightened slightly, and for the first time in years, I saw something other than disappointment in his eyes when he looked at me. I want to understand, he said quietly. Your work, your research. I want to learn about what you've built. Then ask me questions, I replied. Real questions, not assumptions about what I should be doing differently. Marcus cleared his throat. The quantum error correction thing. Can you explain it in terms a finance guy might understand? For the first time in 8 years, My brother was asking about my work with genuine curiosity instead of condescension. It was a start. As we walked toward the main reception area, Mom slipped her arm through mine. Alexandra, I need to ask. Are you happy? Really happy? I considered the question seriously. His mom. I'm exactly where I want to be, doing exactly what I'm meant to do. Then I'm proud of you, she said, and for the first time it sounded like she meant it. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations from relatives who'd suddenly remembered my existence, business cards from Dad's colleagues who wanted to explore opportunities, and meaningful conversations with family members who were finally seeing me as I really was. But the moment that mattered most came near the end of the reception, when Dad pulled me aside during a quiet song. I owe you an apology, he said. Not just for tonight, but for years of not seeing what was right in front of me. I know, I said simply. How do I make it right? I thought about all the family dinners where I'd tried to share my excitement about breakthrough experiments, only to be told I was getting too technical. All the times they'd suggested I was wasting my education. All the conversations that started with, when are you going to get a real job? Start by believing in me, I said. Even when you don't understand what I'm doing. Especially when you don't understand what I'm doing. He nodded slowly. Deal. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Jonathan Pemberton found me one more time. Dr. Hartley, I have to say, this has been the most interesting wedding I've ever attended. Your father is a lucky man whether he realizes it or not. Thank you, Mr. Pemberton. One more thing, he said, lowering his voice. I meant what I said about collaboration opportunities. Meridian Industries is always looking for ways to stay ahead of technological curves. Perhaps we could schedule a formal meeting. I smiled. I'll have my assistant reach out to your office next week. As he walked away, Dad appeared at my side. That was Jonathan Pemberton showing genuine interest in working with my daughter's company, he said, wonder in his voice. Yes, it was. I'm beginning to understand that I may have seriously underestimated you. Just beginning? I teased gently. He laughed, a sound I hadn't heard directed at me in years. Fair point. The ride home that night was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet than usual. Instead of the familiar tension of unmet expectations and mutual disappointment, there was something new, possibility. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Can we have lunch this week? I want to hear more about your work. Really hear it, not just pretend to listen. Then one from Victoria. I looked up your Forbes article online. I had no idea quantum computing could impact legal research. Would love to discuss it sometime. And finally one from Mom. I'm sorry it took so long for us to see you. Really see you. Love, Mom. I smiled, looking out at the city lights as my driver navigated through the late-night traffic. Tomorrow, I'd wake up in my penthouse apartment and continue the work that had always driven me. But for the first time in 8 years, I wouldn't be doing it alone, dismissed by the people who were supposed to support me unconditionally. Sometimes the best revenge isn't proving people wrong. It's giving them the chance to be proud of who you really are, instead of disappointed in who they thought you should be. The Forbes cover story was just the beginning. The real revolution was happening right here, one conversation at a time, one genuine question at a time, one moment of true understanding at a time. My family was finally ready to meet the person I'd always been. And I was ready to let them.